In 2022, we celebrate 130 years of HBCU football. On December 27th, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the 2022 season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media by using the hashtag HBCU130. Now, here's your host, Donal Ware.
You've got it locked to the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Monday, October 31st. I'm Donal Ware. It is Halloween Day, and we got a lot to get to on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. We're going to start things off this way. On Saturday, I'd gotten word from Ed Hill, who's the former sports information director at Howard for many, many, many years, a Hall of Famer himself, that Eric Moore, who founded Anadan.com, who was like a mentor to so many of us, not only just a mentor, but a champion, a friend, to so many of us in the HBCU world, passed away on Saturday. And you talk about legend. You talk about a legend. You talk about someone that elevated HBCU sports. I mean, I think, and especially when you're talking about in the 90s, when the internet, the World Wide Web, as it were, was first founded. And was just a guru, all of the information that he shared with respect to HBCU sports. As a matter of fact, I remember being a student at Morgan State and being very interested, not only obviously in Morgan. I was actually the sports editor of the Spokesman, which is the student newspaper at Morgan State University. And a lot of the information that I got and kept up with was from, as it related to HBCU sports, was from Anadan. I can remember meeting Mr. Moore for the very first time in 1999. I had just become the sports information director at North Carolina A&T. I had no idea what I was doing. And I forget what game it was, but anyway, he kept our stats like he did for a lot of, not only HBCUs, but a lot of schools. He kept football stats, and he kept stats of, for basketball and, volleyball and softball and many other sports. But for us, he did basketball too. But in this instance, it was my first instance. It was my first time as the SID at A&T, and I'm not sure what happened. I had no idea about credentials or anything like that. I was working, matter of fact, with Larry Barber, who legend in his own right. Who was in essence, the SID for many, many years at the MEAC office, but was filling in because BJ Evans, BJ Evans, who now actually is the PR guy for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Well, he had left A&T as the SID to be in essence, the SID at the MEAC, but this had been a year. So Larry Barber was there, but anyway, I don't know what happened, but I don't guess he had a parking pass or what have you. I knew who he was, but I guess I was unaware that he was keeping our stats. So he'd come in the press box, and I guess he was a little perturbed, I guess, because he had to walk a very long way, and I was trying to you're new to this job. I'm trying to think, how old was I? I was like I'm at 25. I was 25 years old as the SID at a Division I institution at A&T. And you're trying to apologize, and he just needed a moment to kind of gather himself. And once he was set up, he came back and we talked, and I said, hey, I didn't know, or whatever it was. I don't remember. But from then on, we became friends. From then on, he did, when I moved on to NC State, which is his alma mater, in the media relations office, he was a champion of that. And then when starting Box to Row back in 2005, just a champion of that, and a wealth of knowledge. I could talk to him. See, I was all about, coming into Box to Row. I was all about, people like him, Luke Williams, right? Hal Lamar, Bonita Best, people who I had seen that really covered and had read, who really covered HBCU sports. I wanted to make those people proud in terms of starting Box to Row. So we talked many, many times. And I don't want to, right here, I want to give you some background, but I'm really going to share some stories and share some of what, some of our experiences and the friendship with Mr. Moore on the weekend edition of Box to Row. So I really want to share that with you coming, this weekend. That's really what I'd like to do. But wow, just a tough loss for many of us, losing Mr. Eric Moore. So I'll talk more about his legacy, what he meant to HBCUs, to HBCU sports, all of that on the weekend edition of Box to Row. And if you're on Facebook, if you're an HBCU person, because everybody is talking about Mr. Moore and what he meant to them. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about what he meant to me, and his legend, and him being a legend, and all that he did for HBCU sports, again, on the weekend edition of Box to Row. So it's Halloween, it's Manic Monday. On the program, let's run down week 9 in HBCU football. We had a lot of surprises with respect to HBCU football, a lot of games, just a bunch of surprises again. So let's talk about the scoreboard. So let's run it down. It kicked off on Thursday. Edward Waters got its third victory of the season, defeated Miles 22-16. It's been a tough season for Miles. Reginald Ruffin leaves. Miles goes down. In essence, just one win on the season. Jackson State defeated Southern 35-0. Big win for Jackson State. And Jackson State's on the road. I don't know that Jackson State will lose another regular season game. There's still plenty of season left to play, don't get me wrong. But Jackson State with 3 regular season games remaining on a roll. Florida A&M continues to roll as well, 27-6 over Arkansas Pine Bluff, who really just continues to struggle. In the Magic City Classic, Alabama State gets a big win, 24-17 over Alabama A&M. And so now Alabama A&M, and we talked about this on Friday, it gets a little bit tougher now for Alabama A&M. Still has Jackson State remaining, still has some games remaining. And remember, Alabama State has already fallen to Jackson State, so Jackson State would win any head-to-head matchup there. In a shootout in Prairie View, Texas, Prairie View A&M defeats Bethune-Cookman 58-48 in a shootout. Texas Southern defeats Lincoln of California 37-2. Grambling State gets a big win, and this is a surprise, 35-6 over Alcorn State. Things have just gone down a bit for the Braves. In a major surprise, perhaps maybe the biggest upset of the year, Morgan State defeated South Carolina State 41-14. Now, I talked about this on Friday, that South Carolina State may have some issues in terms of stopping the run. It has had some issues in terms of stopping the run. It's not the same South Carolina State team, but it was this time last year where the Bulldogs started to go on that roll. But wow, Morgan State's defeat 41-14. So I think what happens now is it opens things up. Howard, who we'll talk about, at least coming into its game against Norfolk State was undefeated on the season. So if Howard remained undefeated, then Howard would be the only undefeated team in the MEAC right now. Can Howard sustain that? We'll see. I don't know, but it opens up some opportunities now for some other teams, including Morgan State, who has 2 losses. I didn't think one loss would win. Now that South Carolina State has lost, we'll see. Maybe it could be 2 losses, still wins the MEAC. We'll see. Speaking of Howard, 49-21 over Norfolk State. The Bison now 2-0 on the season. North Carolina Central defeated Delaware State 28-21. I did say on Friday that I thought the loser of this game would be out. Well, maybe not. But that's a big loss for Delaware State, who's now lost 2 straight games after really playing well. In a thriller, which I had a chance to call, North Carolina A&T defeated Campbell 45-38. A&T was down 28-10 after quarter number 1. Okay, 28-10 still at halftime. Came out. Remember, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago one of my top 5 players to watch. Bashul Tutin, the running back, had a 70-yard touchdown run. He had well over 200 yards rushing against Campbell. Then a pick 6 by the linebacker, Jacob Roberts. And all of a sudden, things started rolling for the Aggies at the greatest homecoming on earth. And that was a big win. A&T has now won 5 straight games and sits atop the Big South with 2 conference games remaining. A game against Norfolk State on next week, which is a non-conference game. That's going to be one of my takeaways on Takeaway Tuesday. Hampton fell to Villanova 24-10. Tennessee State, and remember, I talked about this on when we ran down the schedule on the weekend edition of Box to Row. Your Tennessee State, Murray State is winless, right? Your Tennessee State, you're in the driver's seat in the OBC. You cannot afford to lose this football game, and that's precisely what happened to Tennessee State, falling to Murray State, who was winless on the season, and now you drop 1 game. It was an opportunity. I don't know. There's still some season left to play, but if you're Tennessee State, if you lose to one of the upper echelon teams in the OBC, fine. But Murray State hadn't even won a football game all year. Bowie State defeated Elizabeth City State 36-29. Virginia State maybe was still an outside. Well, no. Virginia State really does. Well, Virginia State still has an outside opportunity. Defeated Lincoln 42-14. I'm going to tell you why the Trojans still have an opportunity at that CIAA Northern Division. Livingstone defeated St. Aug's 12-7. Shawan defeated Virginia Union 26-21. Now, Virginia Union falls from the ranks of the unbeaten. More importantly, Shawan wins next week. Shawan wins the CIAA's Northern Division, and Virginia Union and Virginia State play on next week. So, you got a lot going on right there in the CIAA's Northern Division. Winston-Salem State made it 3 in a row, defeated Johnson C. Smith 28-7. Lincoln of Missouri remains winless, falling to Central Missouri 61-14. West Virginia State had an opportunity to stay in that race in the Mountain East Conference. Now falls to Glenville State 31-30, who was also in the middle of the pack. I don't know if the Yellow Jackets have an opportunity now to win the MEC. Tuskegee wraps up the SIAC's Western Division, defeats Kentucky State 28-7. Virginia University of Lynchburg falls to Weber International 38-20. Virginia University of Lynchburg is winless on the season. Lane defeated Central State 42-31. It was Langston falling to Louisiana Christian 39-14. So now Langston's got 2 losses in that Sooner Athletic Conference as the season begins to wind down. Albany State keeping its hopes alive for a Division II playoff berth, defeated Morehouse 31-7, sets up a showdown now next week in the Fountain City Classic against Fort Valley State. I fear the loser of that game probably is going to be out in terms of the Division II playoffs. And of course, those Division II rankings will come out a little bit later on today. Benedict wraps up the SIAC's Eastern Division, defeated Clark Atlanta 49-20. Benedict remains undefeated on the season. Fayetteville State wraps up the CIAA Southern Division, defeats Shaw 28-20. Florida Memorial falling to Southeastern 41-13. It was Savannah State, and that's why I fear that the loser of the Albany State and Fort Valley State game will be out of the Division II playoffs because Fort Valley State fell to Savannah State 28-24, 21 points for Savannah State in the fourth quarter proved to be the difference. As a matter of fact, that was the Macon Central City HBCU Football Classic in Macon, Georgia. Finally, Texas College falling to Texas Wesleyan 40-12. So that wraps it up for today's HBCU Football Daily Podcast, kind of a somber podcast on today. Again, the passing of the legendary Eric Moore, the founder of Anadan.com. Our thoughts and prayers are certainly with his family right now. Don't forget to tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, where you can find us on our website at boxtorow.com. You can also find us on iHeartMedia.com or wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on the Box to Row YouTube page. Talk with you tomorrow.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at boxtorow.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on Box to Row with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU, Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM, Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Box to Row for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.